Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, we're going to talk about sexual harassment in the workplace and why it's so important for everyone to play nice. That's just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, following the Me Too movement, it's almost unbelievable that we're still dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, and a couple of ladies who are here to talk about that are the authors of this book, Play Nice. Joining me in studio is Brigitte, Kimichik, and J.R. Tomlinson. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Well, first of all, what made you guys write the book?
Well, it's, we met about 25 years ago at a women's conference, and we became fast friends, and JR became a client. She was then working as a commercial real estate broker at a brokerage firm that's very conservative in town, and I was a commercial real estate finance lawyer. So we started meeting regularly, we started working together, and many of our conversations were all about incidents of sexual harassment. And we were floored how often we had to endure it, and it became just a frequent topic of conversation, even amongst friends and colleagues and complete strangers who were looking for guidance. So we decided that it was really important to be a little bit more focused on the topic, especially since the developing by companies of all of their policies and procedures weren't really working. So we found that women coming into the workforce, and even men, were struggling to share their stories and fearing retaliation and backlash and potentially even losing their jobs. And that's really unacceptable. And after 30 years in the workforce for both of us, really nothing has changed. And if you are in a male-dominated environment and you're working with men, which is part of the job, we found that we had to figure out how to communicate with men, how to endear ourselves to them, because they were going to be our mentors and our sponsors, and we needed them for our own successes in the work environment. So we had to roll up our sleeves and figure out how best to deal with bad behavior. And we found that we really shared a lot of commonalities in strategy, and we decided, well, we might have to share all of our strategy with all of the young professionals, and really current professionals, even older professionals. And so we decided we were going to write a book about how to succeed in a male-dominated environment. And then all of a sudden the Me Too movement broke, and so what we thought was just going to be one chapter on sexual harassment became an entire book. And so that's how Play Nice was born.
Yeah, and when we were both starting, I mean, most firms, like my firm, we didn't have a HR department. And many people 20 years ago didn't have HR departments.
And that's scary. So if you don't have an HR department, then what do? You know, who are you going to go talk to? So you need, if you're in a male-dominated environment, you need to be able to go to your senior male person who could potentially help you, ideally someone who might understand you because he has daughters of his own, or a wife who's a professional. And so we really had to figure out how to teach people how to do that.
Sure. And when I was doing homework for the show, I found a wonderful overview video. Let's go ahead and roll that now.
So advancing in a male-dominated field, I mean, I felt like my journey was like full of obstacles, but also a lot of blessings.
This was my career going forward, and I had to figure out how to deal with it. It's not realistic to think that anytime anything happens, you can run to HR, because you may not have an HR, right? And so we believe it's really important to take on the responsibility for yourself to deal with the issue right then and there. Make it a teaching moment.
Yeah, in Plain Ops, we have a lot of realistic, problems and issues that have happened, and also realistic tools that people can use to respond. And I think it can, hopefully, will give you courage to respond in that moment and what to say.
And we see on the news all the time stories of, outrageous sexual harassment. I think a problem for many employees is they don't know where the line is. How do you define, what's crossing the line?
Well, it varies from person to person. Depends on what the tolerance level is of that particular person. So it's very important for the company that has these policies and procedures, hopefully, to talk about examples and run the gamut, because your violator could be one of three different people. It could be a predator who's a dangerous person that you have to watch out for. It could be simply somebody who's afraid of you and sees you as a threat, or it could be a group of guys who are just trying to be funny and they're just generally disrespectful. So depending on what group you encounter, you have to figure out how to respond, and whether you're going to be strict in your response or kind in your response, whether you can add a little bit of humor, whether you need to get some help, maybe seek someone who's a superior to come help you. And if it's a predator and you think there's a potential that you could ruin your career, then it needs to be somebody way at the top, or if you have an HR department, that you would go to them to complain.
Sure. JR, how do you know when to go to HR? I mean, is it something where you could say to the person who has offended you, that's not appropriate in the workplace, or that's not cool, that makes me uncomfortable, or when do you go to HR?
Well, I think, first, like I said, I was in a group that we didn't have an HR, so you had to learn how to deal with it. But I think most of the time for me, most of us, people weren't thinking before they talked, but I think a lot of people is, if it is a person that's saying inappropriate things, I think the most things that we say throughout the book is to react at that moment. And if you're fearful or don't have the confidence to stand up and say something to them, find someone that's a peer or someone that's over that you have confidence to tell them, to have them speak with them directly. But I think the most important is to talk to them at that moment. Because mostly what I would do, I would say, did you just hear what you said? and I'd have them repeat it, and they'd say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. I said, would you say that to your daughter? Well, no, that's different. I'm like, no, it's not. So I think you have to, at the moment when they're there, talk about it. Because if you shove it down, you don't say anything, it could hurt you physically, yourself, mentally, or through your health. But also, too, you wait later, they're not going to remember the instance or what it was. So I think it's important at that time it happens to talk about it. And I think if it continues to happen, like if you bring it up, you tell them it's a problem, and then it continue happening, then I think that's if they don't seem to learn that it's bad behavior, or what your threshold is of what you're willing to tolerate, then I think that's at the point you go talk to HR. And it should be a positive encounter. Always keep it positive, gentle, kind, with some firm tone of voice, but maybe a little bit of humor if you can interject. But if you're talking to a group of guys and they're being unruly, or they're talking about a woman who's walking by, you should, and at that point you're a bystander, so you should intervene and say, hey guys, that is not appropriate behavior, and laugh a little and say, if somebody hears you, you may get reported, and that's not good for you. But if you're using it as a teaching moment, even if somebody comes up behind you and tries to give you a neck rub, and you say, hey buddy, you're in my space, back off, and be funny about it. Right. Stand over there, that's where you belong, in the corner. Just if you do that, then they're going to hopefully learn that was not appropriate behavior, and if they do it again and you say it again, or I just have to raise my hand when I'm in a group of guys and they all know, oh, Brigitte has something to say about what I just said, then it's a positive thing. They're learning from it. You're not putting them on the defensive, because putting them on the defensive is dangerous, because then you've created an enemy in the workplace, and that's what you want to avoid. You want them to know, I'm here to help. I really like you. I want you to learn from this, and I'm not your enemy, and that builds trust in that relationship, and then they're not afraid of you, and they know if they mess up, you're not going to rat on them. So that's really, really important, and that's the whole point
behind play nice, is to learn how to take that ownership yourself and do something about it gently in the moment as a bystander or as the victim.
You both do a lot of public speaking and book signings. We got some pictures of you out and about. I'm curious what kind of reactions you're getting to the book when you're talking to crowds, and what kind of questions are you getting?
Well, we haven't been able to go out in the crowds after during COVID, but before that it was very positive. Everybody was 100% positive, especially the men we had in the audience was positive because they said, wow, because they agreed it wasn't the right thing to go to HR, and that how they could be helpful, because one of our big chapters is on being a bystander, how they can help, and they saw that of how they could help in their own way, and they could also see themselves in a lot of the examples we gave. They're like, wow, I could see myself all the way through this, and then they saw how that was bad behavior, which they didn't recognize at that time, and so now they're like, wow, it is, and how they can do different to help. In the
And they
future.
appreciate they really do appreciate the fact that we are trying to help. And what's been interesting to me is men are much more vocal with their questions, I think, than the women are. Why are women not reporting? Why are these stories coming out 20 years later? What can I do myself to make sure that I am not engaging in that type of behavior? What do I do if I do get into trouble? And those are very interesting questions for the women, because then the women see, well, I think it's okay for me to educate somebody. It's okay for me to use it as a teaching moment and not be so worried that it's going to ruin my career necessarily. And if it doesn't work the first time, try again so that that person realizes, okay, maybe she has a point. Because in every instance that we've seen where we've talked to CEOs of big companies that have said, oh, that's not a problem at my company. And then when you dig deep and you start talking about examples, then they're like, oh yeah, okay, I've seen that. Oh, you're probably right. Oh my gosh, I went, and then they tell you later they went to their employees and they had a meeting and they talked about it, and they weren't so worried anymore about, maybe I'm going to open up a can of worms and I'm going to get in trouble with management because now I've just unleashed this, all these people coming and complaining. Well, if you don't do it, it's dangerous because you're going to affect the profitability of your company, because if it gets out and it's a scandal, we've seen hundreds of stories where big companies, have lost millions and billions of dollars over a sexual harassment scandal or pattern of behavior where they decided the violator was much more profitable to them than the victim, and not realizing that it was just not one victim, it was 20 victims, and all of a sudden it's a huge problem for the company.
Sure.
So, and then other questions that are great from women. Some women are very defensive about their favorite actor, Kevin Spacey. Oh no, he is a good person. He's made great movies. He's just not that kind of person. I don't believe it. And people just have thin skin, and they should be able to handle that without a problem. But then when you explain how bad the problem was and how much the victim is tormented and how that's maybe different from somebody just slapping you on the back or maybe touching you on the shoulder once or twice, or those are things you really have to decide what your boundary level is, right? I'm not offended if somebody does that to me, but if they start rubbing my back and they're standing there too long, I have to say something. Sure. Because their wife may be sitting there, or my husband may be in the vicinity, or people might be watching and it's not appropriate, but that person Sure. may not understand that it's a problem.
And I think there is a lot of confusion on what constitutes sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's out there too.
JR, have you seen any cases where a male mentor is now reluctant to shepherd a female coworker, or is there?
No, I haven't seen that, but I know it's out there. I think it is happening since Me Too came out. There is, like you're saying, the pendulum sometimes go the other way. That now they're like, okay, well, I just won't mentor any of them, which that's a detriment to any young woman trying to go up in that business, because they do need that mentorship and help. So I think that's where it's getting construed to, the wrong way, because I think it's to help them to both help each other to understand that and have the conversation. It's a conversation.
And I can give you a very good example. One of our friends' daughters recently was trying to switch divisions in a company, and when she got to the interview with the main guy of that group, he told her, now you just need to know you're not going to be able to travel with me because I don't want to upset my wife or have her be concerned that I'm traveling with you as a young female, which is not the right thing to do. You're restricting and limiting her ability to become a professional one, a good one that she deserves to become. And the problem with those types of protective measures is really the idea is you should think about or learn what is sexual harassment and just simply don't do it, and then you won't get yourself into trouble. And if there is a problem or you do upset somebody, say something and say, I'm sorry, I think I said something that offended you. Can we talk about this? And that's super helpful and very positive for the health of the company because
Sure.
you'll have a healthier environment.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to give you both a kind of a final word. This is a series, so you have more books in the works?
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah, so the first book we were trying to write, which is called Play Smart, is now being written, and we're heavily involved and hope to get it out by the end of this year. But it will be a similar play on the playground and playground rules. It'll talk about how you as a female or even other young professionals can benefit, male or female, how you can succeed in a mostly male-dominated environment and what tools you need to help you progress and communicate, how to deal with difficult people, how to be noticed if you're working remote, how to interact with your colleagues, young and old, and educate. Use everything as a teaching moment if you think something's not being done correctly. So
Yeah, and it's also too, it's like, which I think is so important, how men and women really complement each other in the workplace and can be an unbeatable team. And that's why I think, the way to work together, so I think it's very positive.
It focuses on diversity and gender discrimination, and the pendulum you mentioned earlier is I've heard it's swinging towards men because now, in terms of discrimination, because now women have all the advantages and women can meet and men can't meet without women, and women have all these things now that they didn't have before, when the error in that thinking is there has been progress, but maybe up to 20% or 25%, not clearly 50% in terms of equality of opportunity from pay to promotion, and those are issues we still need to address in the workplace.
Outstanding. You've both been amazing guests. We'll have to have you back soon. We're going to end with the website, which is thesandboxseries.com. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
That's it for now. We'll see you next time.